From time to time, Elections Canada conducts surveys on the voting patterns of Canadians. One report from 2020 noted that 40% of respondents under the age of 25 were less likely to vote because they felt distanced from politics based on their age and they didn't feel represented. 31% of respondents under the age of 25 said overall they were uninterested.
But, Mark, we know that there are factions of youth who are interested. If you recall, we told you back in December about one group of young people across the country who were pushing to lower Canada's voting age below the age of 18. And then there's young people like Wyatt Sharpe. He's a columnist for his local newspapers called the Arona Weekly Times. He has his own online show and he's interviewed everyone from opposition leaders to the Prime Minister. And he's here tonight to help us look back at the wild political week that was. And by the way, he's 13 as of very recently. So Wyatt, welcome to CP24 tonight.
Welcome, Wyatt.
And thanks so much for joining us. And I've just started to get to know you, Wyatt. And, you know, you are really an incredible, inspiring journalist, aspiring and inspiring journalist. And you ask questions just like, you know, seasoned journalists. So maybe we could talk a little bit more about you at the end, but we have you on here as a columnist tonight and as a host. So let's get to it. I want to ask you about Candace Bergen. What a week, which you've been watching closely. I want to talk to you a bit, Wyatt, about her flip-flopping. So we have reported, of course, that Candace Bergen, the interim Conservative leader, pushed her predecessor, Erin O'Toole, to show support for the Freedom Convoy last week, saying there's good people on both sides. Well, we're going to put up a statement of what she had to say today. She said in part to the truck drivers, she calls they need to call out and denounce any acts of hate and racism. And she says, Canadians and Conservatives have heard you loud and clear. Regardless of political stripes, we want an end to the demonstrations. Wyatt, what do you make of this flip-flopping from the interim Conservative leader in her first week on the job?
Look, I mean, the truck convoy has been fairly a divisive issue between, you know, not just political leaders, but frankly between everyday Canadians as well. In terms of, you know, Candace Bergen, you know, doing this, obviously the Conservatives seem, or at least the majority of members of the Conservative Party seem to have supported the what's being the so-called Freedom Convoy. They seem to have supported that at the beginning. Now, as you mentioned, a lot of them have kind of came around and have kind of changed their perspective on this. I think a lot of it is probably just, you know, they've been there now for almost a week, I believe. And so, you know, 1 to 2 days might be fine for a protest. But when it goes, you know, over a week, you know, people in Ottawa want to get back to their everyday lives. So, I mean, I definitely see why she changed her perspective on that. But at the same time, you know, with the Conservative Party supporting it, again, it's been a very divisive issue. And so I think they really should have probably thought, you know, quite harder before, you know, at the very beginning of what's being called the Freedom Convoy, they did seem to support it very strongly. So I do think they should have probably, you know, thought about that a little bit harder.
And I want to point out, of course, as you know, Wyatt, the interim Conservative leader, Candace Bergen, cannot participate in the race to become the next leader. You held a Twitter Spaces this week, which I was a part of, where there were a number of journalists, former politicians who weighed in on the future of the Conservative Party. Who are you hearing? Because you pay close attention to this. In terms of what are people saying about who would be best to lead this party and unify it moving forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, on YouTube, where I do host my show, the Wyatt Sharpe Show, I've interviewed a couple of people, and on the day that Erin O'Toole resigned and Candace Bergen was put in place, I interviewed one of the people who was kind of initially behind the movement to oust Erin O'Toole as leader of the party, Bert Chen, who you'll remember, I believe it was in September, just after the actual election, he came out with a petition via change.org to basically make Erin O'Toole resign as leader of the party. And so he had some interesting things to say as to you know, who he would like to see as a future leader of the Conservative Party. He told me, for starters, that he thinks Candace Bergen is going to be a good and an effective interim leader. In terms of, you know, potential candidates for the actual permanent leadership of the party, you know, you're hearing names of people in the ranks of Patrick Brown, the mayor of Brampton. You're hearing, obviously, some of the highest-ranking members of the Conservative caucus currently, like Pierre Poilievre, Michelle Rempel-Garner, both of whom are fairly, I think, effective members of parliament, regardless, if you agree with their views or disagree with them. They seem to spread the message that the Conservative Party wants to spread fairly effectively. And then there's also people in the ranks of, Peter MacKay, who ran last time. A lot of people were putting off his name, but today he wrote what was an opinion article as to what he thinks the Conservative Party needs to do. He didn't mention whether or not he was going to run, but I definitely think him doing things like that may signalize that he is interested. And so there's, lots of names that, you can kind of that are floating around right now, but ultimately until, the National Council of the party actually organizes what they want to do, as the president of the Conservative Party told me last night, it really, it's not much more than just basically informed speculation of people speculating who they think may run.
That's a great way to put it.
And Wyatt, I want to read you a statement from the Prime Minister from earlier this week. He said, "I have attended protests and rallies in the past when I agreed with the goals, when I supported the people expressing their concerns and their issues. Black Lives Matter is an excellent example of that. But I have also chosen to not go anywhere near protests that have expressed hateful rhetoric, violence towards fellow citizens, and a disrespect not just of science, but of the frontline health workers." So, Wyatt, I wanted to ask you, should the Prime Minister meet with these Freedom Convoy protesters?
Obviously, I'm sure if the protesters were given the opportunity to, I'm sure they would. But at the same time, some of the stuff that these protesters are saying really is not acceptable. And at the same time, these protesters, they're going to be in Toronto over the weekend, near Sick Kids Hospital, near Mount Sinai Hospital. They're going to be near these hospitals, and I do sincerely hope that they're thinking of the horns that they're blaring. If it's going to be a one-day protest in Toronto, then that's fine. But if in Toronto what's going to happen is the same in Ottawa, where it's been over a week of horn blaring near hospitals, specifically Sick Kids Hospital, that's just not acceptable in my view. And I think the Prime Minister may be saying something right in terms of this type of a protest, but at the same time, you do have to hear the various perspectives of different people. But if this protest in Toronto over the weekend does go forward, like the way some people are saying near Sick Kids Hospital, as I mentioned, then I think these protesters may lose some credibility, again, because they're doing it near a hospital that has a lot of sick children in it, and I just don't think it's acceptable, and I think the majority of political leaders would agree.
Wyatt, so I know you're incredibly busy and you have your own show. We have been showing that the Freedom Convoy protest has already gotten underway here in Toronto. Our Beatrice Vaisman is live on location. There's been a fair number of tractors there. They're farmers. Apparently they're leaving and coming back tomorrow. This is right on the steps of Queen's Park. Premier Ford, want to ask you about his response. He said on a radio show previously, it was earlier this week, wow, it's been a long week. He said, God bless them. But then he said, and he's been criticized for not doing enough. And he said today, I have all the confidence in the world of Toronto police. They have my support. Any acts of hatred or intolerance, they will not be tolerated. And he said it's not a protest anymore in Ottawa, it's an occupation. He said Ottawa businesses have been hurt by this occupation. It's time for this to end. He said, folks, let's put an end to this. Do you think it took the Premier too long to make a bold statement like that? We heard him say in the last week, he's always supported truckers, but he's always supported vaccine mandates. And that was really the gist of it.
In terms of, the length of how long it took the Premier to come out and say something about it, I don't think that there can be a whole lot to be said around that, because I think that, this has been a largely unpredictable rally. And at the beginning of the rally, I think, some people portrayed it to just be, what was just going to be another protest on Parliament Hill. But to the extent of what it's gone on to now, people in Ottawa want to get back to their lives. Small business owners in Ottawa want to get back to being able to, serve their customers. And so, the Premier coming out now and saying that it's basically not acceptable for these, protesters to continue being in Ottawa. I think, again, people in Ottawa want to get back to their lives. There's small businesses that can't open. So If there was a time to come out and say something, it probably would be now based on that. And in terms of, once again, the length of how long it took them to, actually come out and say something, again, I don't think there can be a whole lot said, about the timing.
Wyatt, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Wyatt.
It's certainly, encouraging to see engaged young people. There we go. Engaged young people like yourself. Certainly, there are many young people who are engaged, despite what some of the Elections Canada and other surveys have to say. You really are an inspiration to your peers. So thank you for sharing your perspective with us tonight.
Thank you.